faces. And that way, if you have any questions, you can make sure that you ask them. And I have just now started recording. So let's start with your questions that you may have. Do you have any questions to start with? There will be other places that you can ask questions if you would like to. All right. Let's look at your agenda. And I'm going to start off with talking about task 5, which is a reflection. And if you will notice, I put in there that this is not your competency folio. You do not put your evidences in this section. This is where you are looking at the competencies you've been working on as you've been working on the APSL. And you're reflecting. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to tie together what you did in the class, your class readings, any of our discussions, your group members' discussions, what you're doing in your internship, where you're actually doing things in your schools. And the last part is what you've done with your completion of the first 4 tasks. So you're trying to tie all of those together in your reflection, and you're basing them on the competencies that you're supposed to be working on. Now, remember that when you're working on the APSL, you are to work on 12 competencies. 8 of those are the ones that are listed in the syllabus, and they include communication, change management, delegation, dialogue and inquiry, judgment, systems thinking, technology, and visionary. Now then, out of the rest of the competencies, you choose 4 that you want to work on. And I've listed those in your syllabus as well, so you have all 21 of them that you can look at. So it's going to be this reflection, this task 5 is going to have 12 little sections to it. And like I said, you're tying everything together, but you're not providing the evidence. You're thinking back. If those of you, any of you went through national boards, you had to do a lot of reflection, and you did a lot of thinking about what you had done, and then you had to explain it. That's what this is. It's a thinking about what you have done and what those things that you've done in class and in your APSL and in your internship, how have they helped you become better communicators? How have they helped you in dealing with change and trying to get the people that you work with to accept change? Because you know, just like I do, that the world we're living in today changes all the time. And there are so many things that are going on. And if the schools don't adapt to some of those things, then the schools become very frustrating places. And adapting doesn't mean that you give into. It means that you figure out how to work with, and that you are doing what you can to meet the needs of the children as well as meet the needs of your staff. You know, this is one of the things. Several years ago, I taught an entire course on change and how to work with people to get them to buy into what you believe needed to be done to help your school get better. So you're looking at, you know, how have these things, what have I done in each one of these areas that's helped me become better communicators, better facilitators of change? Am I good at delegating? Now, I will tell you that that is one of the hardest things I have ever had to do as a school administrator. And I'm going to tell you a little story about it and why it was never an easy one for me. When I was a superintendent, I had an assistant superintendent who was just as good as gold. But DPI had sent a request for a particular report. And he showed me the report, and I read it, and I told him, I said, there's a missing section. And so I told him to go back and add that. Well, he showed it to me again, and it still wasn't right. And I just got to the point, I thought, okay, I can't do his job, and I can't catch everything. So he's just going to have to turn it into DPI, even if it's wrong. and then DPI can just deal with him. And so that's what I did. But at the same time, it made me question how much I could actually trust that he was going to get things right when we were trying to do things in the school system. Now, that doesn't mean I'm right or he was right. It means that I had a problem of just delegating. Now, on the other hand, I did have another assistant superintendent one time who was good as gold, and I could give him anything to do and it would be done well. So, you know, you have to deal with the people that you are given. And in most situations, you don't choose who your assistants are, at least in a small school system. In a small school system, the assistant superintendents may have been there before you. You may have an opportunity to choose some, and they may not be what you wanted, but they're the best fit because of the way that they interact with other people in your system. So there are always things to look at, and you rarely ever have the best of both worlds, and you just have to figure out how to do the best that you can. So delegation can be one of those that's very hard for a lot of us type A people, and I will admit I'm a type A person, and probably most of you are. If you're going into administration, you're probably type A as well. So it can be very difficult, and it can be something that you work on your entire career. And then judgment. What have you done in those 3 sections of the course that's helped you make better judgments? And how have you improved in systems thinking? Now, one of the things I want to talk a little bit about is systems thinking, and we're going to get a little bit into it later tonight. But when you think of systems thinking, what I want you to think about is your place in your school in relationship to the larger group of schools, which would be your school system, and an even larger group of schools, which is the system of schools in your state. So how do you fit in? Many times we want to look at things from our perspective, and our perspective doesn't take into account how we fit into the rest of the world, is particularly your school system, or maybe in a larger system, it may be a group of schools. How do you fit into one section of a group of schools? So that's something that you have to look at. I actually had a central office person tell me before I was ever went to work in a central office, and he said, "Barbara, you look at things so differently from most of my principals." He said, "They only look at it from their perspective." But he said, "You look at it and you actually take the numbers and pay attention to it, and you will work with us when we say, okay, I need you to take this teacher because this principal doesn't want them, but I need to take something from you." And he said, "You will do that." And he said, "A lot of people will not do that, and they give me a very hard time." And he said, "You have the ability to figure out your role in the whole system." Well, that's systems thinking. You know, the world does not revolve around you and your school. You and your school are one part of the system and one part of the state. And one thing that you really always need to remember is who pays your salary. Most of the time, it is not your school. Most of the time, the money comes from the state to your county, and the money can come from the federal government, depending on whether you're an EC teacher or whether you're a career and technical education teacher. But it can either come from the federal government or the state government. There are a few local positions, but not that many local positions. So you really have to think about yourself, your school, and how you fit into the bigger picture. And if you can really do that, then you will become one of those principals that the central office will consider to be rare, because you will look at things from other people's perspective and not just yours. By being able to work with our central office, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I got some extra parts of positions that I probably didn't deserve because of the number of children we serve. But because I was willing to work with them, they would make sure I was taken care of. And so you want to have that ability to figure out your role in the system and be fair. You know, don't let yourself get taken advantage of. Make sure, but also if you have more teachers than you need for the number of students you're serving, own up to it. They may or may not take the teaching position away from you, but own up to it so that they know that you are realistic and you see things from the whole perspective. And then the other one that there were two more you were required to look at is technology. How have the things that you've done in your PLC, in your assignments, how have you grown in technology? How have you become more competent? And then visionary. Visionary is where you are looking at your school and you're trying to set a vision for improvement. You know, that's what we want in this state and in every state. We want improvement. So you're trying to come up with looking at things that's going to help you grow. You're looking beyond your school and what you're currently doing. You're looking for the betterment of the entire school and school system. And then you choose 4 of the remaining of the 21. Now, by the time you finish this semester, you're going to have dealt with all 21 of them. In the APTEL, there will be certain ones that you'll be supposed to be working with. And we'll go over that when we start talking about the APTEL. I do not want to talk to the APTEL about the APTEL until we're almost finished with the APSL. But I do think that some of you are probably ready to go begin your thought processes with the task 5. So I wanted to go ahead and introduce that to you. And Dr. Tillman, I see that you've been able to join us. Welcome to our session. Anytime you want to add something, feel free to let me know.
Well, the only thing, if you, when we're talking about the competencies, I gave them a document that I use to record what they do so I can keep up with it. And if they will use that, they will, it will be good, because there's been some changes over time. And for example, judgment does not require either an APTEL or an APSL. So that means that it will be an open-ended. Okay. They will do one because, and I said, you fulfill the requirements of Dr. Todd, and she says you're going to do a judgment, therefore you will, but it will be considered open-ended. So when they label it, it's open-ended. And the ones that they absolutely must do would be conflict management, creative thinking, organizational abilities, and personal responsibility for performance.
Okay, now those are totally different from what was in the syllabus that Dr. Lamb sent us.
I know, but when you go online to the portfolio,
okay,
to the competency folio,
okay,
that's what it says, because I went through and checked because I had that discrepancy last semester.
All right.
And so I'm just telling them, be careful, you know, it says what the requirements are with each competency. Make sure you look, and if the requirement for the semester is not a requirement in the folio, you make it open-ended.
Okay.
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 Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, the ones that you're, okay, let's make sure that we look at 2 different things. The reflection is not the competency folio. Do not try to mix them up.
Right.
They are different. So the reflection is your thought processes and you're putting all these things together. Now, when it comes to the competency folio, that's where your evidences go. And that's where I think Dr. Tillman is talking about. They've added some other things that they want to come from the APSL. And you will have it. Your evidences will be things that you've done in the APSL. And that particular document that she's talking about will show that. But I'm going to follow the syllabus that Dr. Lamb sent. And so for the reflections, these are the ones I want to see. And the ones that Dr. Tillman mentioned, you can choose those as your 4 additional.
That's what I told them to do.
but make sure you address the ones that Dr. Lamb has put in our syllabus. We're all using the same syllabus. That's right. Teaching 601. So we should still be fine if we address those that he has put in there. All right, if you'll look at the bottom of the first page with me, it says, to be proficient on this task, you are to include a reflective analysis of course content in relation to the awareness and development of each competency, and include a description of clinical experiences and how they related to the awareness and development of each competency, and narrative that successfully addresses the 12 competencies that you were to deal with in this particular APSL. Then in order to be considered accomplished, and I really think this is very vague, it just says it must be better than you would normally expect for it to be competent. So anyway, you know, just realize it must be perfect, I guess, is the best way to look at that. In doing this, I have had them turn in previous times, and I have had them turned in where it was hard for me to find all 12 of them. And I am one of these that I will count and make sure all 12 are there. So rather than make your evaluators, who are probably very much like me, I would go ahead and label them and put a number beside of them so they can go down and see that you've got all 12. And I put on, I think it's your second page, I put on there at the top of the page, label it as task 5, reflection, competencies. And then your subheadings are going to be the name of your competencies that you worked on. And you just, I'd put 1, whatever your first one is by alphabetical order, 2, whatever your second one is by alphabetical order, 3, and so forth, and just keep going on down through there till you have 12. And when you have 12, you're done. So, you know, make it so easy that your evaluators never will question whether you've got what you've got that you're supposed to have completed. All right, do you have any questions about the reflections?
I will say that you have a good idea there to have them do them in alphabetic order, because that's how they are in the folio. And when they get to the folio, they can just sort of go from one place to another without having to search and decide what's the best thing that they did in the reflection and pull that with the thing that they're going to attach.
Right. And
I've given them a format to use so the evaluator can find what they're looking for.
Yeah. And you know, the name of the, I don't call it, well, it shouldn't say it this way, but it's sort of, you're wanting to showcase your work, and you're not wanting somebody to have to hunt it and make sure that you've got it done. You've done it, be proud of it, take your time to do what you need to do, and turn it in, and they're going to find it that you're proficient. They're going to see that you are proficient or above. And one thing I would say to you all, don't be disappointed if you just get proficient. Proficient is all you have to have. And in some situations, if you're a classroom teacher, it's going to be really hard to do more than be proficient. You just simply don't have the time. Now, if you're in a semi-administrative role, it may be that you can go ahead and get to the accomplished. And in some schools, you might, if you're a smaller school, you might have more opportunities to get to the accomplished than you would in the proficient, in a larger school where there's so many things that are divided up. But, you know, don't be disappointed if you just get a proficient, or if you get a score of 3.5 instead of 4. Don't be unhappy. That's still a good score. You know, that's still, you've done what you're supposed to do, or you're above what you're supposed to. 3.0 would, out of a 4-point scale is what you're looking for that you have to meet. Now, your evaluators will, if they find something is really short, they will send it back to you, and they will tell you what in a note somewhere along the line, and it's usually in the very last of their notes, what is missing. And they'll tell you to fix that part. And so they will give you an opportunity to do that, but it's just so much better if you can go ahead and do it and get it done correctly to start with. All right, any questions about anything related to task 5? All right, I want to talk a little bit about some terms that are in your reading for this week. And it really does go back to systems thinking in a roundabout way. But the terms are micropolitics and macropolitics. So if you'll look on your agenda, I took just a little bit of information from the article you're supposed to read that is listed as a link. And one of the things that the authors of that particular article are talking about is that they feel that your understanding of micropolitics is central to you understanding use and abuse of power. And then they gave you some references because they mentioned Blaze in 91, and they described micropolitics as the use of formal and informal power by individuals and groups to achieve their goals in organizations, and that's both cooperatively and conflictive actions and processes. And they go ahead and say that micropolitical strategies are wide-ranging and represent power-based strategies that can be conflictive, cooperative, consensual, and protective. And then it goes on and talks a little bit more about micropolitics, and I'll let you read that. But I want you to look at that third little paragraph that I've got where I talk about macropolitics. Macropolitics deals with the politics which pass laws and send to the organizations what they need to do. So if I'm saying micropolitics, who would we be talking about in the school settings? Micropolitics would deal with what?
Could it be like department heads and that sort of thing?
Well, it could be your own school. It could be how your school handles things. It'd be the principal and the teachers and the department heads, but it's in your school. So the micropolitics is what's working in the place where you're actually working. Now, when I'm talking about macropolitics, that is what group?
Is that more of your, like in your county?
It would be the county, and remember, the county most of the time gets their the way they handle things. Their policies usually come from state laws.
The state, yeah.
And the state sometimes, a lot of the things they do comes from federal laws. So the micro would be what would be happening in your organization, at your site. Macro would be all of those different entities that influence what's going to happen to you and for you. And sometimes it feels like it's more to you than for you. At least lately, that's the way it seems to be feeling to me. Because I don't see too many evidences of them providing you with vast resources that's going to help you meet the goals that you have. So most of the time you are having to do a lot on your own, and you're having to solicit within your community. And so that's why it becomes a feeling of things being done to you, but it's the laws. And one of the chapters that you are reading this week is also dealing with laws. Now, the book was written, I think, around 2009, so it's close to 10 years old. But it gives you an understanding of what was going on and what was happening. And I was actually working I guess I was at the superintendent's level when they were talking about if we didn't get it right, that it was going to be the last chance for public education. And that's when all of the testing started. So I may have been a principal when it first started, and then it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, I think of it like a small snowball starts rolling. And I really do think a lot of times that what is passed at the legislature, they don't realize what it's going to be after it goes through the lawyers. And the lawyers keep them legal, but that also sets into place some things that I think legislators, when they were passing it, didn't think was going to happen. They didn't know all of the legalities and the things that go with it. So their ideas are good, but sometimes some of the things that have to be done for the legality and through once it goes through the lawyers sort of changes the way that things happen. But anyway, I want you to be aware of the micropolitics and the macropolitics. And I really think when you're reading chapter 1, where it's talking about the history, I think you'll enjoy reading the legislation. You may not enjoy it as much from knowing what's happened from it, but at least it gives you an understanding of why some of the things have happened that have happened. And you wonder why some of the school systems are having to redo and rename and close some schools and change and move principals. Well, it's all in the legislation, and that's the way it was started. It was set out. It just took several years to get to the point that you use those last pieces. So I think that will be some interesting reading for you, and it will give you a really good understanding of what has transpired. And then, of course, they have just recently, during Obama's administration, they updated the No Child Left Behind, and so you're dealing with some of that now. Now, I put 2 of the vignettes that's in the article that you are to read about the micropolitics, but I changed the focus a little bit. The first one was about Trish, and she's the principal of an established school, and she used formal authority to make most of the decisions. She felt confident that her style suited the school, the staff, and the students, since the school had a very good academic reputation and was regarded highly by the parents and the wider community. Well, at the beginning of this year, she appointed Michael, and they called them deputy principals. In several school systems, it would be assistant principals, to the school. And it came to Trish's attention, and there's always someone that brings something to your attention when you're the boss, just know that. That Michael was spending a lot of time with the other deputy or the other assistant principal, and that he was asking for advice and counsel from Bob. Well, she got to thinking about that, because somewhere along the line, she and Bob did not always agree. And she began to think that Michael may follow the lead of Bob, and that this alliance would become detrimental to her preferred way of working, because she and Bob had different styles. So her response then was to work with Michael and Bob individually, setting specific tasks for each. So in essence, what did she do? Divide and conquer. So that's another way of looking at it. At first, Michael was a bit intimidated, but after the passing of some months, he felt more comfortable with her and understood her mindset. By the end of the year, their relationship was on a good footing, and she chose him to act as principal for the first 3 months of the next school year when she took a leave of absence. While Michael was flattered to be given this opportunity, he couldn't help but feel guilty that Bob missed out. After all, Bob had been at the school for some years. Well, these kind of things do happen. And when there's more than one assistant principal, principals sometimes will feel more confident with one than they will the other. Many times they'll feel confident about the person they brought in rather than the person who was already there. But what I want you to do is look at the questions that I added, because I've sort of changed a little bit, and I'm putting the focus back on leadership, which we've talked about a couple of times. As you think about the information in Vignette 1, as well as the information you've read about regarding leadership, what's Trish's leadership style? What do you think her leadership style would be?
Like micromanage?
Yes, she would be either that, or she would be more autocratic in that she would want people to follow the more classical lines of leadership. So yes, I think that would be it. What's the real issue between Trish and Bob?
Well, they had problems before and didn't always agree, right?
That's right. So what's the real problem with those two?
I feel like you're talking about my school right now.
Well, many times you can identify situations where you have been and see the same thing over and over. The examples that we give you actually happen somewhere. So
They sure do.
So, we're not telling you to identify them, but if you see, then that's helping you think what you can do to make your school a better place.
It seems like Bob just doesn't do things the way Trish does, and she wants things done the way she wants them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't tell really if the way Bob's doing it is bad. It's just not the way she wants it done. And so, she's trying to make sure everything runs her way.
That's right. Is there anything that Trish could do to improve her relationship with Bob?
Like if they sat down together and actually listened to each other's opinions and, really understood how each person runs things and why they do that, I think that would help.
I don't think she needs to be having separate meetings with them. They need to be having an administrative team meeting.
Exactly.
Where they all have the conversations and everybody's hearing the same thing.
And I agree with you. I think that's where everything is probably starting to go downhill, is she's meeting with them separately and they're getting different pieces of information. Bob probably feels left out, and Michael is the new kid on the block, and he is getting teacher's pet treatment, so to speak. And so it can become a very difficult situation. And so you can understand why Michael would feel a little bit strange when he's left in charge the next year with Bob having been there for so long. What do you think Trish's main concern regarding running her school is? You've already hit on it.
Did they change that she didn't want her style of leadership to change? Like she liked what she's doing and she didn't want them to like get into form an alliance and book her system.
You're exactly right. She likes doing things in a more, I would say, autocratic way than democratic way. And she doesn't want that to be changed because she may not know how to work in a different leadership style. So this is not necessarily saying anything bad about Michael or Bob, except Michael's figured out how to do what the principal wants him to do, and Bob is not there yet. Why do you think she chose the new person to fill in for her when she was going to be out for a few months?
Because she already had a disagreement with Bob, and she felt like Bob would maybe like go behind her back, stab her in the back or something.
Or Bob might actually try to change things, and so
Right.
that's what's going to happen when she comes back.
Right.
And I think she probably felt like that Michael would carry it on the way she told him to,
Right.
and that she would be able to take over better when she came back. When Trish comes back to school, what do you feel is going to be the relationship among the school staff and the three administrators?
Well, the staff probably already sees the issue between she and Bob, so that's probably already a problem in the school, and it might be an even bigger problem because Bob will probably feel like he should have been the one left in charge.
Right. You're right. Most of the time, the staff knows what's going on, and they will admit what's going on when the people that's involved may not. So, you know, this is this kind of situation you may find yourself involved in. You never know. But so that's one of the reasons I wanted us to look at it, so that you would have time to think about it. If you find yourself in this situation, if you're the newly hired one, and you know, you're getting favored treatment, what can you do to help buffer and change some of those situations? So now we're going to look at a totally different style of management. Blair, this was an experienced principal in an inner city school, and he had 2 deputies, 2 assistants, 1 registrar, 30 teachers and support staff, 800 students, and a vigorous, interested community. He led from beside his deputies and educated the staff about changes to the school. As well as being inclusive, he recognized and drew upon the expertise of his teachers and shared his leadership role with members of the administrative team. Now that already tells you a big difference between the 2 leaders. Blair and his team were faced with implementing a new science syllabus. To do this, his team engaged 3 consultants, and for 3 days, the consultants conducted sessions around the teachers' expressed needs to scope and sequence a science curriculum responsive to the needs of their community clientele. And the sessions raised the personal energy, contribution, and competence in every one of the teachers. Paraprofessional staff members were co-opted into resourcing the curriculum. So everybody's ideas in the school were valued and critiqued. Decisions were then made together. Following the intense in-service, staff then chose to work interdependently within 1 to 3 teams and prepared the science curriculum for the school, lower, middle, and upper, over the next 6 weeks. Every week there were meetings of the whole group to inform, discuss, and connect each other's work. Blair's leadership gave professional decision-making opportunities to the staff who would implement the curriculum, and they respected his trust. Even though they often sought the opinions of the team when they were needed, there was almost 100% support for working professionally in the teams, and collegiality in that school flourished. So what's Blair's leadership style?
He's more democratic.
He is more democratic. Everybody matters to him. He wants to hear from everyone, and they all work together. Is this not exactly what you've been reading about should be happening in your PLCs for schools to improve? Why did his leadership style work so well with this particular faculty and staff? What would you say about that faculty and staff that would help you understand why that style works so well with them?
Well, it seems like they all respect each other and they all collaborate together, and it's not like one person is a higher up than the other ones. You know, they're all kind of equal, and he distributes leadership.
That's right.
And I think it doesn't include cliques. Like a lot of times when you notice that a principal has a group, a clique, or certain people that they favor, it kind of makes you not as willing to, you know, be as open and flexible as you would be if there wasn't a cliquish kind of relationship in the school.
Right. All right. This particular faculty was very professional. They were used to working together. They were used to sharing ideas. They were used to people listening to them. If the faculty and staff had been less professional, would this particular leadership style have worked well?
No.
And why not?
Well, they probably wouldn't have respected each other enough to work collaboratively and be effective together. And they may not have taken any, even though he worked alongside them, and they probably wouldn't have taken any direction from him or done things their way, you know, and not all be on one accord.
Okay. Well, and that brings a really good point. There are some schools that you cannot begin to start with by being collaborative because they're not used to that. They have to be taught how to do that. Now you can work to that, but sometimes you have to start with the group and figure out what it is they know. And then where you want to guide them, you can treat them very professionally. You can ask for their opinions about everything, but you may have to do it in small steps before they will get to the point they will respect you enough to tell you what's really on their mind. I'm going to give you an example that occurred to me. I had worked in a county where when we had a meeting and the principals met with the superintendent, if there was something we had a concern about, we just told him. And so he knew how every one of us thought. And there was not ever any repercussions because that's what he expected from us. Well, I just assumed, I was younger and young to the profession, I just assumed everybody was like that superintendent. Well, I moved to another county, and in that county, my first principals meeting that I attended, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake in my entire life because there was not a single principal that offered an opinion about anything. They went down the agenda. The only people who ever talked were the people that was presenting the information. And I sat there and I thought, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Well, I worked in that role as an assistant superintendent in that situation. It took me, I took the groups that I worked directly with, and they started seeing my leadership style, and they realized they could come to me and they could share things with me, and that I would listen to them, and then we'd talk about them and we'd figure it out. So with the groups that I actually was responsible for, that's the way we operated. But when the whole group met, the principals, not a single principal would speak up. And I just really found that to be so odd. I just could not figure out how in the world they managed to deal with that. But I will tell you that after I became the superintendent in that school system, it took years to change that direction. But it did about it was changed by about my 4th or 5th year as the superintendent when they finally started sharing in meetings. And I thought, oh, well, I may not have done much, but I've at least done a few things that I'm really proud of. But whenever you get a school like that is so entrenched into not sharing, it takes a long time to change. And one of the things that I think we don't do is we don't allow enough time for schools to make a change. To make a really good change, it's my opinion, it takes about 4 to 5 years for the school to reverse its direction. The first year or so while you're at a school, you can identify what the issues are. The second year, you start working on them. By the 3rd year, they will really start changing and getting better. And then by year 4 and 5, and sometimes it may take another principal coming in behind you who is strong in something that you've started to really get your school turned around. And that's also coming from experience. I was at a school that when the superintendent sent me to the school to be the principal, and I was a new principal, but I'd worked under an extremely good assistant, I had worked as an assistant principal under a really, really good principal. And the superintendent's directions to me were, I'm not going to tell you what I think is wrong there. I want you to go there, work with those people, and figure out what's wrong and fix it. And that was my directions. And it took me a while to figure out what he was saying, but I understood it after I got there. The people loved the children. They loved the community, but they were very hard on the children. because so many of them had grown up in difficult situations. And I'm talking about the faculty. And they were not going to put up with anything from these students because they were determined that the students could do better than what they were doing. And so it was sort of a tough love. But you've got to give and take. You can't be that way. That was one of the things that was causing the school to not function well, is they were not working with the emotional side. They were very good with the mental, but the kids weren't performing because they didn't enjoy being there. So you have to have a whole emotional piece. But anyway, after 4 years, we had the highest writing scores of anybody in the county, and we only had 2 AIG children in our entire school. And we had a 6th grade that was full of learning disabled children. So for our little students to be able to do that, it was pretty much miraculous. But what we did is I figured out the strengths and the weaknesses of my teachers. And so I had the same teacher teaching the 5th and the 6th grades for English language arts, and the same teacher teaching the math for the 5th and 6th grades. Because one of my teachers was, my 6th grade teacher was extremely strong in language arts. My 5th grade teacher was extremely strong in math. And so the kids didn't change because that was during Southern Association's time when they didn't want the kids changing classes if they were below the 6th grade. But my teachers did. So that's using your creativity to meet the rules and still do what needs to be done. And so by the time we got through that 4th year, our scores were the best that they had been. We were moving up. Then I moved to an assistant superintendent's position in another county. The principal that followed me, within 3 or 4 years, that school had over 90% of their students on grade level. So I know it can happen. You just have to believe it and you have to work. Is it easy? No, it is very hard work, but it takes the commitment from everybody, and it takes somebody diagnosing where to start. And it will take 4 to 5 years to get the turn. And then once the turn is made, then you can keep going up to where you get to that 90% of your kids on grade level. And the last time I checked, they were still pretty much, most of the kids in that school were on grade level. And so, you know, when you hear these situations, you think, can it really be done? Yes, it can. But you have to take it slow and easy, and you can't make people do it. They have to buy into what you're doing. One of the questions is, as you think about the type of leader you hope to become, how will you decide your reaction to various types of faculties and staffs that you will inherit when you become a school administrator? What is it you're going to really, when you first go there, what is it you're looking for to help you know how they've operated? Because you can't go on what you've been told.
Observation.
Observation. Are you going to be quick to make changes, or are you going to be slow to make changes?
Slow.
If you're smart, you're going to be slow to make changes. That first year, you're going to be observing, and you're going to be figuring out, okay, what is it that's going on that's causing these lower scores that we're getting? What is it that children are not understanding that we've got to figure out how to present it a different way? So that first year is going to be spent with, you'll make a few changes because you'll have to. You know, you may have to change schedules a little bit because your people are not the same. But you'll make a few changes, but not a tremendous. And then the second year, in the summertime, when you're setting up for your next school year, that's when you're really going to start putting who you are into place. But don't make the mistake of going in somewhere and trying to change everything that first year. Most of the time, if you try to do that, you will not be liked very well, and it will take you a long time to get over that.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
So I've been trying to get my principal, which is a new principal, on board with departmentalizing because, I mean, some of our teachers are really strong math teachers or reading teachers or science. And I'm like, that's where we're going to get the most bang for the buck. But she's like, well, it'll mess with their EVOS data and things like that. But I'm like, you know, we're trying to grow kids. You know, we can't just focus on a teacher's EVOS data. It's going to change from year to year because you're going to have different groups of kids. And I was like, is our main focus on EVOS data for teachers, or is it to grow kids? And I cannot convince her to even think about it.
All right, this is a question for you to think about. If
Okay.
the EVOS data, if the teacher's really strong in math, would not the EVOS data show that strength, regardless of which teacher was teaching it? And it may show up under the wrong teacher's name, but would the data not? I mean, would it not grow?
Yes.
And if your language arts was really strong, would that not grow if they were doing all of it in each one of those areas? We see that. I think maybe your principal is looking at things differently than the way I did.
Right.
We
And she's
have
a new
the-
principal.
Huh?
You know, she's a new principal. She was an assistant principal for 13 years, and they just transferred her to us. And, you know, just like you're saying, you know, come in and make small changes. I mean, it's been changes from duties to lesson plans to professional development to lunch. I mean, just everything. And like, you're right, you're spot on. It's got to be small changes. Make the best changes you can the first year, and then the next year, you know, you build on that.
Well, and you do it in the summer while nobody's there. You know, so everybody who comes back is equally changed.
We got a new principal this year, and I'm come from a really large school. We only have 5th grade, and we have 600 kids. So we have 25 regular 5th grade teachers. Okay.
Okay.
So we've done something completely different because I've been departmentalized, okay, where I've done math and science and another person's done ELA. I've done both. Math and science, I've done ELA social studies. And I've done both of those, and I've done self-contained. I prefer to be self-contained. It's more work for me, but I don't have to deal with behavior problems from another teacher who can't control their class. So when my really good partner left me and went to being a principal, I decided I'm going to start teaching everything because I don't want to deal with the other. I had to pick my battles. So what my new principal did this year is she gave us a choice.
Okay.
And we literally have one hall that is all self-contained and one hall that is departmentalized. And then we're going to compare at the end of the year. But I'll tell you, I see both because I've done both. I'm going to tell you, I think there's something to self-contained. Our self-contained teachers at our school have the best scores of anybody.
I think it's your teachers more than the fact that it's self-contained, though.
Okay, maybe so. I don't know that, but it just seems to be, it's the relationship. I think you have a relationship with a smaller group. I think it's a combination of all of it, but it's going to be interesting at the end of it to see how it works out. But I have the same issue with a new principal.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is your principal allowing you all to help make decisions, which is smart. And then I think looking at the end and seeing which ones work out best. The other part of, I would never have done what I did my first year. I would never have done the departmentalization, or asking the 5th grade teacher to teach math and the 6th grade teacher to teach English language arts my first year. I had to, first of all, know the teachers and know what their strengths were and know how they interacted with the children. And once I had observed those teachers for a year and knew they were really good friends and knew that those two could make it work, that's when I used it. And then when when one of them left and went to another school, I never did that again because I didn't have the right people. Another thing that plays into this too is if you have an EC teacher that's coming into the classroom where they're both in the same room, that really, if they're the right people, works great. But if they're not the right people, you're better off to keep them separated. But the year that we did so well with the writing scores, my EC teacher, this group had a lot of young kids. She was going into the classroom the same time that my really good English language arts teacher was. And so she was in there and the teacher, so that group of kids had two full that were helping them with their English language arts. And so they both knew what was being expected. But again, you can't do that if the teachers don't work well together. So you've got to first know your people. And maybe that's what your new principal's doing. Maybe the new principal's trying to get a handle on how these people interact with each other. But Sally, I think that you should have a really good year, and it will be good for you to see at the end of the year how things go.
Well, we've had some other changes. Like, I mean, there's been some negative too, because we've had like, she wants every teacher out at recess duty. Whereas before we've had that break. So I literally have 17 minutes to eat lunch and get out to duty. So there's been some there's been some of that too. But I've really tried to take it from the administrator's point of view this year and try to see it as how she would see it, as she did it, not to make us miserable, but to have more eyes out there so there's less issues.
Right.
And I get that. So
Right.
It's been interesting to see it from an administrator's viewpoint.
Yeah.
You start looking at things a whole lot differently.
You do. And one of the
I've
things,
been really, my administrators talk to me a lot about trying to pull yourself away from some friendships and, and get away from the teacher. Because what's interesting is our new principal used to be a teacher at my school. And then she became assistant principal. And then she left my school for 3 years and was a principal somewhere else at a smaller school and did a great job. And so when my principal retired, she came back. So it's hard to do what she's done when you have some teachers like me that are still there.
Yeah.
When you've been a teacher,
right.
and she's younger than me.
Yeah.
So she's done a great job. So I've enjoyed taking her lead and just trying to stay positive.
And she appreciates that. I mean, I know that as a principal, you appreciate the people who are positive and will listen to you and will try to do some things and don't stab you in the back. There will be those too. Just be ready for it.
Yeah, well, I try to think of that, but I also, try to. It's interesting seeing what all they deal with.
It is, and I want to speak to one thing that you brought up about everybody being on duty at the times when kids are changing classes. While that is not a popular thing, that is a safety thing. Mm-hmm. Because there are so many things that happen during transitions, regardless whether it's a small school or a big school. And I actually know that when one of the first incidences of school violence was a stabbing, and it was in a hallway, and it was in a high school in the western part of North Carolina. And I've been in and out of that school often for ball games, and it's not what I would consider to be in a high crime area. It's not that at all. But there was two kids that were just mad at each other, and one had brought a knife to school, and so in the stairwell they stabbed the kid, and I think the child actually died. But the reason the school was not sued was because that particular morning, the assistant principal had went to every duty station in the school, and the teachers were where they were supposed to be. And so they were not sued. It was never a question because all of the teachers were at the places they were supposed to be, And there was a teacher in that stairwell that was right there. And so because of that, that's where sometimes we have to be a little bit inconvenienced to make sure we're protecting everybody. And while you talk about not suing the school and you look at that, well, you know, we shouldn't even be concerned about that. Well, yes, you should. Because if your school system is having to spend all of their money that they got fighting a lawsuit that because somebody's not there, they're going to lose, then you're going to have less and less money to deal with in your classrooms. So it all affects everything. And you know, yes, your school must be a safe place. And so, yes, there must be times when you are on duty that you don't want to be there. So that's just an administrative way of looking at things. But I know that is one example that has always stuck with me, because they started doing training for school safety, I think maybe the year after that happened. And so that's when shortly thereafter you started having to have a school safety plan, that and the county had to turn in a county safety plan. And that's when resource officers also became a part of the school piece. And at some point in time, I hope to address to you that principals are there as in loco parentis, which means you're in the place of the parent. Don't give so much to the school resource officer, because they look at it as law enforcement. They don't look at it as trying to mature children. If it's broken a law, it goes to law enforcement. But if it is something children are just misbehaving and you need help to get them on the straight and narrow, they don't need a record with the court system. So, you know, that's where you've got to be really careful, especially at the high school level, because that's where it can get out of control a lot. Well, I think our time is about over. So if I want you to look at the rest of those questions and then just look at and think about it from your perspective, and then look at the last page about your own school. Think about how your student population has changed for the last 10 years and what can you do to help your students who seem more needy than they have in the past. And do you think they really are more needy? And if so, why do you think they're that way? So, you know, that's in that second chapter where it's talking about demographics and the changing of the population in schools. So I think there's a lot of things that's going on in that, but one of the biggest pieces that I see is you have so many children who are living in poverty. And that's at the very basis for why a lot of things are changing. You know, these children don't have the interactions that you and I grew up with, most likely. They don't have books at their house. Many times they barely have enough food. So, you know, we have to deal with the poverty piece before all of the other things fall into place. All right, anybody have anything else that you wish to comment on or say? Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you have learned something tonight and it's been helpful. And good luck. And there, I think I have, if you're in section 4, unless something was turned in today, I've gotten everything with tasks 1 and 2 finished. The other day I had most of task 1 and 2, unless it was turned in over the weekend for section 8 that I've reviewed. So what I try to do is I focus on one task at a time. And so I'm really going to start focusing on task 3, and hopefully I'll get some information back to you within the next few days. One of the things, and it's not any of you because I recognize your names from things, but one of the things I am a little concerned about, if you want to share it with some of your group that maybe don't attend our sessions, is I will make comments, and I think Dr. Tillman does, and yet when I get the one that says it's the final, the changes haven't been made. And so please, please don't do that. Make sure that the version you send to us is the one where you made the changes. So I'm thinking that people are just uploading the wrong one, or either they never have found where my comments were, or Dr. Tillman gives much better comments than I do because she takes it and looks at it and dissects it. But I'm thinking that they're just not getting our information and doing what they need to. So just if your group, if it comes up in your group, just remind them that they need to make the changes that we tell them, that the peer reviewers tell them, and that Dr. Tillman tells them, that I tell them. And then when they upload the final version, it needs to be the one with all the changes made.
Dr. Todd, I have a quick question about that.
Yes, ma'am.
So even though I had already submitted task 1 and task 2 and I had fixed everything, I ended up needing to go back and add something else to task 2. So even though I've already done my final submission for you in the Dropbox, do I need to submit it again now that I've changed some things, or do I just keep that for me to put in my final thing?
You can keep that for you and make sure that Dr. Tillman is okay with that. For the next 2 or 3, for the task 3 and 4, don't submit in the Dropbox until Dr. Tillman has told you what to do.
Right. And I had already had all of that. It's just later I realized I needed to go back and put something else in, and I just needed to make sure I didn't need to resubmit it.
No, that's perfectly okay.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Very good questions. And I do appreciate you joining us, because I'm hoping that this will be sort of what you would get if you had a class where we actually could meet face to face. And you'd get that feeling of being able to share. That's one of the reasons we do this, so that you will feel like you can talk about things that are of concern to you. And that's one of the reasons that I'm trying to deal with some of the textbook things, so that if there's any issues that you might have questions about, that you can ask us. All right. You have a wonderful week, and I'm going to stop the recording and end the meeting, and enjoy this beautiful weather. I love warm weather. I don't like mosquitoes. So for those of you who are dealing with mosquitoes, they love me though. I have several bites from the weekend. So just best wishes, and find whatever bug spray you can find that'll work. Have a great week.
Could I ask that those of you that have peer review groups that do not attend your class meetings and they don't come to our live sessions, would you please do them the favor of really evaluating their papers using the outlines that Dr. Todd talks about and including the things that are required? Because I'm getting papers that have, they're not put together the way we're talking about putting them together. And when we move into the APTEL, I'm not going to read the same paper 3 and 4 times, because there's just not enough time in our lives. So,
And then because we're running behind with the first one, APSEL, the APTEL is really going to catch us if we're not real careful.
That's exactly right. And so if you can,
we've got to get the first one right.
Yeah, we're going to work on the first one as hard as we can, but the second one, once we've told you what to do, we really shouldn't have to look at it again. It should be what we say, and if not, at the end you can redo the whole thing, which is not a good deal.
And that is true. It is not fun.
It is not fun.
All right. Thank you. Anything else, Dr. Tillman?
No. I just, if they can just spread the word to their peer groups, because we see the same choir here.
We do.
And, we need some other people. I've got a list of 6 people. I have not seen task 2 the first time. So I'm just really needing to get, and that can't all be hurricane stuff. So
I don't
really
think so
need
either.
to help them, lift them up, and
it's a live hurricane.
Tough love is where you are. Okay, tough love. Thanks.
All right. Anything else from anybody? All right. Y'all have a great week.
Thanks, you too.
Yeah.